This week, Reb Leib Heyman shares with us a fascinating novelty, and rather a correlation between Joseph and a future descendant of Joseph, as well as Judah and a future descendant of Judah. I'll introduce this by saying that a couple times a year, there is a different haftarah that is read. Meaning, at the end of the Torah portion that we read on a weekly basis, our sages also instituted that we should read a portion from the Nevi'im, from our prophets. And very often there is a great connection, or sometimes even more than one connection, from the haftarah to our Torah portion. Now, whenever the holidays fall out on Shabbat, we read the holiday haftarah, not the Shabbat Torah portion haftarah. Whenever Rosh Chodesh, the new month itself, falls out on Shabbat, the Rosh Chodesh haftarah, there's a special one, is read, and not the Shabbat one. There is also a rare occasion, which again it could happen, a couple times a year, is that Shabbat is not Rosh Chodesh, rather Sunday is Rosh Chodesh. And there's a special haftarah that's read, it's called Machar Chodesh. It's from the book of Samuel. That is the area, that is the portion from Samuel 1. That portion is read, and it's a very interesting story. It's an episode that just mentions at the beginning the concept of Machar Chodesh, that tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, but it speaks about the love and friendship that David and Jonathan had. David, even before he was king, and Yehonatan, Jonathan, who was the son of the first king of Israel, the son of Shaul, of Saul. And the love that Jonathan had for David, says Reb Leib, was remarkable. It's evident from when you read our prophets, the Nevi'im, to the point where the two made a covenant between themselves. And Yehonatan was ready to give David even his crown. He was also risking his life to stand up and to protect David in front of his father, Shaul, which caused him nothing but trouble. So Reb Leib's question is, where did this love that Jonathan had for David come from? It definitely seemed odd. There's no mention in the verses that David did something specific for Jonathan to love him that much. All that's mentioned, as Reb Leib says, and I'll share it with you, is after David defeats Goliath, Shaul asks David the following. King Saul says, I'm in Samuel 1, chapter 17, verse 58. It says, Vayomer elav Shaul, ben mi ata hanar. Saul comes to David and he says, who's your father, young man? You know what David answers? Ben avdecha Ishai bet halachmi. The son of your bondsman, Ishai from Bethlehem. And then, that's the end of chapter 17. The very next verse, the first verse of the next chapter, chapter 18, it says, Shaul. Right after David finishes introducing himself to David, after David introduces himself to Shaul, and then Shaul thanks him, the next thing it says, V'nefesh Yehonatan ikshra b'nefesh David, that the soul of Jonathan is attached to the soul of David, Vayahavehu Yehonatan kinafsho, and Jonathan loved David like his own self. But nothing happens. He introduced himself, he's automatically loved. Very out of character, very out of place. You see, Reb Leib explains the closeness that these two had only started off there. But it's strengthened. And strengthened even more when Shaul was pursuing David. So we could rationalize David loved Jonathan. That makes sense. Because He was a famous guy. He was the prince, the son of the king. Who wouldn't want to love and befriend the son of a king? Plus, Jonathan stood up for David. Makes sense that David liked Yehonatan. But why would Jonathan love David to such an extent, to such a level? David benefited from this relationship. It doesn't seem like Yehonatan did at all. To the contrary, he lost, ever since he started associating himself with David, he lost his family, he lost his father, he lost fame. It was a very hard thing. And it seems out of place. So Reb Leib gives a fascinating answer to answer this. A very powerful one. And he tells us that the source for Yehonatan's love for David stems all the way back to their forefathers, to their tribes. Yehonatan being from the tribe of Binyamin, and David being from the tribe of Yehuda. Now look what happens. When the brothers return to Egypt with Benjamin, Benjamin now stands in front of his brother, not knowing it's his brother Joseph, a viceroy. I'm sure he was scared. Then he is set up, he's framed by this viceroy, and he obviously knows it, and things aren't looking too good for him. He has the silver goblet, it's given back to him. Again, the reason why Joseph even did that test, I'm not going to get into it, but that was in order to test his brothers to see if they really did teshuvah, if they really repented, if they really loved their younger brother Benjamin, and if they could go back, how they would have treated their other brother Joseph, he himself. He sentences Benjamin to something worse than death, slavery. So Reb Leib now explains, you know what's going through Benjamin's mind at that point? And he says this may sound trivial, but it is so important to understand this. He says, you know what's going through Benjamin's mind at that time when he is literally standing and maybe even shaking in front of this viceroy? He's thinking about back home. He's thinking about his elderly father, Yaakov. He's thinking about his wife. He's thinking about his 10 kids. And he's thinking, how is my father, my wife, my children ever going to survive me not coming home? How's my father going to live with himself when he knows that his second child from his favorite wife, Rachel, is gone? How could that ever happen? And these feelings of his family and sorrow were going through his mind. And then something changed. Something changed which was dramatic in this relationship. Judah steps up. Beginning of this week's Torah portion. And he offers himself to be a slave for this viceroy in his stead. He comes to this viceroy and he tells him, I will be a slave. Judah is coming and he's bailing out his little brother. Just at the moment when he thought everything was over, he sees hope. Benjamin sees hope. Look at the verse. The verse says as follows. Here we go. I'm in chapter 44, verse 33 in Genesis. Ve'ata yeshevna avdecha tachat hana'ar. Let your servant, he's saying himself, stay instead of the boy, as he's a slave to my lord, my father. Let him go home with his brothers. When Judah says this, explains Reb Leib, something very special happened. At that moment, a new and unique love was created between Benjamin and Judah. specifically a new and unique love that Benjamin had for his brother, Judah. And this is the reason. Can you imagine? You think your life is over, you think everything is done, and then your brother steps in and offers to spare you. Even though the end of the story is that they all were set free, obviously, none of them were taken as slaves. But at that moment, there was a new affection and love that Benjamin had for his brother Judah, for him trying to step in and take his place and saving him ultimately. And that was so powerful that it transcended to future generations. It was something that kept the tribes of Benjamin and Judah close forevermore. And the reason that over 1,000 years later, that Benjamin's descendant now displayed a tremendous amount of love for Judah's descendant. You see, something new was created then, and then fast forward to the time of Jonathan and King David. Jonathan, the son, a descendant of Benjamin, David, the king, the son of a descendant of Judah. Now Benjamin is returning the favor. He's returning the feeling that was done so many years ago. And Reb Leib says there's no other way to explain this inherent love that Yehonatan had for Judah, for David. Because this gesture goes back all the way to Yehuda, what he did for Binyamin. It was a reciprocation. Okay, it's a fascinating concept. And there's something very practical I'm going to share on that when we get to the end of this segment. But now, based on this, Reb Leib asks a very strong question. He says, if this is true, who was Jonathan's father? Shaul HaMelech. If Jonathan is from the tribe of Benjamin, and he loves the descendant of the tribe of Judah, David, how is it that Shaul, his very own father, despised him, despised David? How could a descendant of Benjamin now hate a descendant of Judah to such an extreme that he wanted to kill him? Just doesn't make sense. Reb Leib says it can't be from the jealousy that Shaul had for David, that the women were singing. Take a look at your screen. This is in Samuel 1, chapter 18, verse 7. It says, "Vatanena anashim hamisachakot tomarna hika Shaul be'alfav v'David b'rvotav." The women started cheering and they sang, Shaul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Meaning that David is at least 10 times greater than Shaul at war and at conquering. So could that have provoked the jealousy that Shaul now would have for David? Does that make any sense? Just because some women were singing that? Doesn't seem. It seems like it's a little too much, to the point that King David became a son-in-law of Shaul, meaning after that case, even before David was king, Shaul gave his daughter to David as a wife. He was his son-in-law. Yet he pursued to kill him. Shaul was in shock when his surrounding wasn't feeling remorse and sad for him when he was having to go through all this pain that he had to deal with David. He was shocked how they couldn't feel bad for him. The Talmud says that Shaul, when he was crowned as king, was like a new baby boy that was born. A new baby that has no sin. Yet how could he turn and hate David so much? So at first it was so odd how Shaul's son Yehonatan loved David so much, but then we made sense of that. But now that we made sense of that, we're left with a big issue. How is it that Shaul despised David so much? especially being that he is now a descendant of Benjamin, who should reciprocate the kindness that Judah displayed for Benjamin. Now, Leib says the answer lies in the onset of our very great nation. If we take a look at chapter 30, verse 1 in Genesis, it says as follows. Vater Rachel ki lo yaleda Yaakov. Rachel sees now that she has not given birth to any children for her husband Jacob. Vatekane Rachel bachota. And now Rachel envied. She became jealous of her sister Leah. Vatomer el Yaakov. She comes and tells her husband, Havali banim v'im ayin meta anochi. Give me children, if not, I am dead. Rashi says that Rachel was now jealous of her sister, but not really jealous of her. He was jealous of her deeds, because must have been her deeds which resulted in her getting pregnant and giving birth, to which she was lacking. So she was jealous of the fact that she was more of a tzadeket, more righteous than her. And that made her want to aspire to be greater. Reb Leib says, that's nice, great explanation, we're not going to argue on it, but we still cannot take the basic terminology of the Torah out of context. And the simple context is that Rachel was really jealous of her sister, and jealousy is not a good thing. Something which we are prohibited from, should not be envious of another. So how does Reb Leib explain? She had a feeling of envy and jealousy, yet at her great and high level, Rachel was able to channel that towards being jealous of the fact of her great deeds, and that propelled her to want to ameliorate her very own deeds. But nevertheless, there was a feeling of envy and jealousy. When did this take place, asks Reb Leib. When did Rachel have this feeling that she was able to later channel, but she had this feeling of jealousy? Take a look at your screen. Right before, it says, Vayiva boker v'hine hid le'ah. Vayomer el Lavan. I have the wrong verse. I must have taken the wrong. Must have grabbed the wrong chapter. Anyways, I'll tell you what the verse says. The verse tells us that Rachel sees that her husband Jacob, and specifically her sister Leah, have a fourth son. And the fourth son was named Judah. At that moment, that's the end of the previous chapter. The next chapter is when she becomes jealous of her sister. Explains Reb Leib, based on Rabbeinu Bechaye, who is one of our Torah commentaries. He says that after Leah had her fourth son, Yehuda, then she becomes jealous of her sister. It was right after Judah was born that Rachel becomes jealous of Leah. Reb Leib says this is the source for Shaul's jealousy of David. You see, since Rachel became jealous of Leah with the birth of Judah, so now Shaul, who's a descendant of Rachel, right, because he comes from Binyamin, is also now jealous of David, who's a descendant of Leah, right, who comes from Yehuda. So this jealousy was already implanted and available, and that's where Shaul came with his jealousy for Yehuda, meaning since his descendant, his ancestor Rachel, displayed I'm using this word very roughly, but a foul character, a mistaken feeling of jealousy towards her sister, so too there was this pitfall that her own descendant would unfortunately be able to fall into in the future. And that's why that's why Shaul became jealous of David. Now, based on this, we're not out of the woods yet. We've got another problem. who decides, or how does this happen, that Shaul takes a left turn, so to say, a negative turn as a descendant of Binyamin, as a descendant of Rachel towards David, and his son Jonathan takes a right turn and does something beautiful to reciprocate that beautiful act? How can they both have both of them have the same sources, same qualities that were passed down to them, yet one goes left and one goes right? So this is where Leib now says something fascinating. He says that from here we learn a great principle that helps us understand the entire subject, and the subject, I'll name it in Hebrew and then I'll translate it. It's called Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, that the deeds of fathers are a sign for the children. And what that means is as follows, and Reb Leib explains this very, very clearly and very beautifully. He says that the result of any given situation depends entirely upon the reaction of the child. Meaning, the Rebbe explains that a child inherits from their parents many diverse qualities. And at times these qualities may even contradict one another. Could be a quality of generosity, yet a certain quality of stingy. And a certain quality of maybe being very happy and joyous, yet being a little bit depressed on another end. These are diverse qualities that every single child inherits from their parents. So who determines which of these qualities will actually take place and be actualized in the person's life? The child does. It's in the child's hand to decide. He or she will be the one to choose from the potential traits that they inherited from their parents, which will mold their personality as human beings, as adults. In the case of Shaul, explains Reb Leib, there was an external factor that caused him to be jealous of David. That was the women singing that David is 10 times the man that Shaul is. That's what caused him to actualize the jealousy that his ancestors, great-great-grandmother Rachel had for Leah. Instead of going and attaching to the love that Binyamin had and created for Yehuda and to reciprocate that, he unfortunately let an external force infiltrate his feelings and eventually bring him down. And that was the issue. And that is a beautiful answer to explain how Shaul went left and his son Yehonatan went right. Now, Reb Leib finishes off by saying this pattern continues with the next generation too. The next generation after David was King Solomon. King Solomon had a specific relationship with Yeravam. Yeravam is a very famous individual. He eventually became a king of Israel, but he also is known to be the worst Jew to have ever lived. Now, why do I say that? It's not my words, it's the Rambam. Maimonides tells us that every single person can be as great as Moses or as horrible as Yeravam. Meaning, every single Jew can be as great as Moses, meaning to fulfill their 100% of potential, or unfortunately we can waste all that God-given potential and we can be like Yeravam, who wasted his potential. So Yeravam is really, really looked in a very negative light. But the relationship that these two had is a continuation of the concept of Maaseh Avot Siman Banim, that the deeds of the fathers are a sign for the children. So let's explain. Yeravam came from the tribe of Ephraim, which is again a descendant of Yosef, who's a descendant of Rachel. And he merited to become king, as the Talmud says, because he rebuked King Solomon for a mistake that King Solomon made. However, his downfall, the Talmud says, and his punishment was because he rebuked King Solomon in public, humiliating him. And you're not allowed to humiliate anyone, especially a king. So meaning, Reb Leib explains that the descendant of Yosef, Yeravam ben Nevat, was now punished for rebuking a descendant of Judah, which was King Solomon. Even though Yeravam's intentions were noble, noteworthy, and he even was rewarded by having become king, nevertheless it was still done the wrong way, and he was punished for that. He was driven out to Egypt, and he later on returned to rule over 10 of the 12 tribes. Reb Leib says this seems so similar to what happened to Joseph. What happened to Joseph? Joseph insulted his brothers. He hurt them. He spoke ill about them to his father. He embarrassed them. Okay? What did this result? This resulted in the brothers despising him and eventually selling him and sending him off to Egypt. Very similar to Yeravam, a descendant of Joseph. He was embarrassed. He embarrassed King Solomon, and he was sent to Egypt. What happened in Egypt? Joseph there became a king over his brothers when they came to visit him, and they all bowed down to him. And that seems very like the life of Yeravam. Furthermore, Joseph was separated from his father for 22 years. And this separation between Jacob and Joseph was not like a regular separation between a father and a son. You see, they were really, really close. Their souls were completely connected. More than an ordinary relationship of a father and son. And the separation, of Leib says, must have manifested in something greater which transcended to future generations. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. This separation was brought to the core of our nation, which 750 years later, I know I said before 1,000 years, but it's really 750 years later, took place when Yeravam, a descendant of Joseph, separated Bnei Israel from God by making them worship idols and do all types of horrible things. How long, take a wild guess, how long was Yeravam ben Nevat king for? Okay, I know you knew the answer, I know you're guessing. Take a look at this. Melachim 1, chapter 14, verse 30. V'ayim asher malach Yeravam 22 shana. 22 years exactly was the amount of time that Yeravam was king over Israel, which was the exact same time that Joseph, Yeravam's ancestor, was separated from Yaakov. You see, that separation between Joseph and Yaakov caused a separation from the Jewish people to Hashem because of Yeravam. So what we see here is that what Joseph did transcended on later. The fact that he embarrassed his brothers. He embarrassed Judah, who was the king of his brothers at that point, is something that took place again. It happened all over again 750 years later. So with all of this, I think it's a fascinating concept. The whole idea of the love of Jonathan for David and why Shaul didn't love him. And then now we have King Solomon Yeravam. I want to share two lessons that came to mind when learning this with Reb Leib's son-in-law, Rabbi Israel Meir Safra. And he also said that Reb Leib really, really preached and loved the concept of Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim, how as parents, we are able to, and the things that we do are able to really make a tremendous impression on our children and all of our future generations. Okay, so on that part, I want to say that as parents and grandparents, we all have to know that all we can really do is lead by example. That's all we can do. To prepare our children for life and to provide them with the necessary tools for success, all we can do is lead by example. Because if we start preaching and shoving it down their throats, they're not going to want. They just won't. They're going to kick back. They're going to revolt, rebel, the whole thing. At the end of the day, every child's going to have to make their own decision. Just like God gives us free will, we kind of also have to give free will to our children to make their own decisions. We are there to help them, we're there to guide them, but we have to let them make their own decisions. All we can do is lead by example. That's Maaseh Avot Siman Banim. The deeds of the parents will be a good sign for the children. The children will see that. They'll see you being genuine and you being happy and you being successful, and they'll want that for themselves also. That may not be their first choice, but it may be their second or third choice. They may come around. But we have to give the respect and the individuality and the free will to our children to make their own decisions. It's a very, very tough concept. We have to push very strong on how we lead by example, yes. But we cannot impose on our children overly. A certain amount, yes, but not overly impose. From then on, all we can do after leading by example, preparing them with the tools they need to succeed in life, the confidence, the love, all we can do from there is pray. And pray, and pray, and keep on praying. Because it will be God that will guide them down the right path, the path of success, the path of keeping connected to Him. So that's the first lesson I wanted to share. The second lesson I wanted to share, and this takes us back to the whole story of Benjamin and Judah. You see, in life, we sometimes don't understand the power we have to cause others to like or even love us. We never know what we can do that will affect others. Now, obviously, the opposite is also true. We don't understand the power of how much we can unfortunately hurt someone or cause someone to dislike us. But in the positive realm, we see that Judah did something which, of course he did it out of the love for his brother, but he really did it out of the love for his father, let's be honest. Out of the nobility that he made a pact, a promise with his father that he would bring his brother home, Benjamin. But look at that deed, which, again, may be simple, may not be simple, maybe taken for granted or not, but to Benjamin that struck a chord of commitment, of care, of love. In our lives, we have to understand that we have the power to cherish those relationships, to build those relationships, to infuse certain relationships with care and love from others based on what we do for them. And the more you do for a person, the more you love them. And the more you care for a person, the more you're there for a person, the more you're invested there for a person, is the more you will love them and they will love you in return. It's a very, very important concept. I think that what I'm trying to bring up on is the sensitivity of being aware of how sensitive another may be, and sometimes simple things that we may do may endear ourselves to them and become beloved to them and create a very strong bond and relationship, which is priceless. It's extremely valuable. So I hope you all enjoyed tonight. I certainly did. Preparing it. And it was a real honor to be with everyone tonight. So, if there are any questions, now would be a great time to ask. Go for it. Isaac.
It's going to be a very messy question, or maybe two questions.
Okay.
Dina. Now, there's a number there that makes Dina one of the people, one of the girls, one of the women that goes, among other things. That's one. Now, the other question is, Joseph, what is the connection between Joseph's wife Potiphar's daughter, stepdaughter, whatever it is, and the connection to Dinah that some rabbis are talking about.
Okay, so it really has to do with last week's Torah portion, so I'm not going to go into it too deep, and I think I did mention it, but in one of the previous weeks. But the idea is as follows: is that Dinah's daughter was the daughter of Shechem and her, and
Right.
when she was brought home, the brothers sold her as a slave because they said she was impure because Dinah was raped. She found her way as coming from a very noble background. She found her way to Potiphar's house and she became the maidservant to Potiphar's wife. When Joseph comes down to Egypt, he was also noble. He was a hyper genius. He was very successful. And when he was taken out of jail by Paro said, "Now it's time you should get married." And Joseph didn't want to marry a woman from Egypt. He wanted to marry someone from his family, someone that his parents would approve from. And miraculously, there's a whole midrash. He met Osnat, and they were wed. Osnat being his niece.
Can I say something?
Yes.
So I heard that when Dinah had this baby, so Yaakov put her in the field and gave her a kameah from the family and put it on her. And then when Potiphar and his wife were passing by and they saw this baby and they were childless, so they took this baby and they adopted her. And then when later on, when Yosef became the viceroy, so they were having a parade and he was very, very good looking. And all the girls were screaming when he passed and
throwing gold
things. And the only thing she had was the kameah. And she took it off and she threw it. And he saw it on the floor and he picked it up and he said, "Who does this belong to?" And he recognized it as from his father's house.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yes, yeah, it's the famous midrash. I didn't want to get too into it, but yeah, that's the long story, Isaac.
And the being that the person in that case that her brother ended up marrying her in order for her Simon, I think it's Simon, in order to protect her so she can go. And what's that story that as her being the extra person, and what does Shimon has to do with marrying her and all that? I didn't get that when I was reading.
Not familiar with that.
Oh, it was one of the comments I read there.
Okay,
thank you.
you're welcome. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, what it is in Mamlois, it does say that in order for the other brothers not to kill her. And that's how they ended up getting her to Potiphar's Shimon marrying Dinah. Did you know that?
No, Shimon married Dinah, his own sister,
Yes.
in order to protect her for what?
Yeah. That
To console her?
from her brothers, from
To
the rest of the
console her?
brothers.
nobody else would marry her.
Because of the whole situation with Shechem.
Okay, I learned something new. Nice. I love it.
That's
She
right.
didn't want to go with them.
I guess.
Chazak u'Baruch.
Thank you, Dad. Okay,
Thank you, Rabbi.
you're welcome. Okay, any last questions? Oh, I have something in the comments over here. Someone said, "I thought Jesus was the worst Jew." Something very interesting about Jesus, especially being that even though it has nothing to do with his birthday or his death, but it's the day that they try to associate it with in 2 days from now on the 25th, maybe I'll make a little mention of it. What a weird day for a rabbi to be born on, right? But anyways. Did I say
You
what my birthday is? No,
have
that's
to
not my birthday.
remember, Rabbi, you must remember, you were born on the 4th candle of Hanukkah. That year, it just happened to be that other day. But you were born on the 4th night of Hanukkah. And that's what was so special. And like a lot of my friends have mentioned, you are a light unto all of us with your beautiful Torah. And that's how you should see it.
I joke about it. Thank you. I do.
Like a
Thank
true
you.
mom. I agree.
I guess you remember that day better than me, Mom.
Great.
I really do. It was so special. It was really, really special. Baruch Hashem.
Alrighty. So I want to answer that question on that thought. So something interesting about Jesus is that he was actually a Talmudic scholar. Yeshu was his name in Hebrew. And he was a Talmudic scholar. And he was like the rest of the Talmudic scholars, that they were all able to perform miracles. It's very interesting to note that there's not one rabbi in the Talmud who ever voiced an opinion that was not able to resurrect from the dead. That was like the easy trick that they were able to do.
Wow.
They were able to do so much more than that. So walking on water, resurrecting from the dead was nothing special. It didn't impress the other rabbis, even though they rarely ever did it, but they all knew they were able to do it. So the fact that Jesus was able to do it was like, big whoop, who cares? But to the others, to the Gentiles, they saw that as, wow, they've never seen that before. Now, what went wrong with Yeshu, with Jesus? What went wrong with him was the fact that there was some political strife. He wanted to keep on rising up the ranks. He was being withheld. He wanted to prove himself to be the greatest or one of the greatest, to the point where he revolted and he broke into the temple and he stole the 72-letter name of God. And he burnt the name onto his arm so he would never forget it. And when he would articulate that name of God, he was able to really do things that the other scholars were not able to do. And then they put him into excommunication. And yes, it's nothing to hide. It was the Jews who handed him over to, I believe it was the Romans, right? Was it the Romans? It was.
Roman.
Handed him over to the Romans to be crucified and killed because they just lahavdil elef havdalot, can't compare, but similarly in one aspect, the same way that the brothers judged Joseph to be defiant and to go against, and he deserved to be excommunicated and even killed, capital punishment for what he's done to them, so too the Jewish court, the Sanhedrin, back in the time of Jesus, decided that he had to be excommunicated, and that wasn't good enough. He had to be administered with capital punishment. Now, you have to understand, he had no intention to create a new religion from his beliefs and his ways. Nothing to do. It was 100 or 200 years later that there were some disciples who started digging up the story of Jesus, that they made a whole franchise out of this. Right? Was it last year? I think it was last year. I gave a whole long talk about the roots of Christianity and Jesus. Right? I think many of you were even there. This was before Corona. If not, I'll hopefully provide the link in the details of the YouTube video that I'll upload.
Yes, please do that. I didn't hear that.
I will. Bli Neder, I'll put the link in there. And Isaac, if you text me, I'll send it directly to you either way. But you see, what Christianity is today has nothing to do with Judaism and nothing to do with Jesus. And so on, and does that obviously mean that Christmas and New Year's And I'll give you both of those classes. Last year, we spoke like at great length with those two. We did a lot of research on it. Okay, honestly, I can't even remember everything I said, so it's recorded. But those two have nothing to do with Judaism. Honestly, nothing to do with Christianity even, and they only have to do with horrible things that were administered to Jews. I mean, I really want you to watch those two classes. I'll put those two links in the video description. Eileen.
Hey, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you just said because I never heard that Jesus put the 72 names of God on his arm.
72 letter name.
Yes. Right. So he put that.
It's one name that was 72 letters long.
I know that's the end. That's when the Red Sea splits.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. It was probably it was, but I mean, the 72 letter name was written and kept sacred in the fold of the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol.
Yes.
So the breastplate would open up, and then in the fold on the side, that's where it was inscribed and closed, and it was there hidden. No one knew it because of its tremendous powers.
Right. It's the 3 lines prior to the splitting of the Red Sea. It's the first letter of each word that builds 72.
Okay,
But
very nice.
moving on for just a brief minute. So because he tattooed it on his arm, we want to excommunicate him?
No, it's not that he. Well, first of all, breaking into the temple to steal such a name, which was obviously sacred and unheard of, nobody should ever do that. That was already a breach on his end.
Did he get in trouble because he was desecrating his body because we don't believe in tattooing?
He didn't tattoo it. He burnt it. He burnt it onto his like a burn. Which obviously that wasn't why he was punished. He was punished because he did that, but they didn't say he deserves to be put to death yet. After that, then he starts doing all these types of, you want to call them magic tricks and supernatural things, which were anti the whole concept and purpose of Torah and God and the powers that God gave to his sacred name. That's when he crossed the line and he started coming up with his own types of philosophies. He was slowly deviating way too much that the rabbi said we have to hand him in to be
Got it.
Executed.
Got it.
He couldn't save himself.
Good what?
With all this trick, he couldn't save himself if he knew so much. Good.
I guess so. I guess he couldn't. So just to answer, I thought Jesus was the worst Jew. He was not the worst Jew. He was a Jew. He was a scholar. At a certain point, he was an observant rabbi even. But he went off. But Yeravam ben Nevat, just to explain to us a very sad story, he was a king for, as we said, 22 years, and he forced the Jewish people to worship idols. The leader, the icon of the Jewish people, was imposing upon the entire nation to commit idolatry and turn them away from God. It was a very severe thing. So Yeravam ben Nevat was much, much worse. All right. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. Always a pleasure.
A lot of
Thank you.
Now. Very beautiful.
Thank you. Everyone have a great, great, great weekend and Shabbat Shalom.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.